One of the key reasons why the SMART table or the situation table works is that there's a very solid privacy framework for sharing information appropriately between agencies.
Welcome everyone to another episode on Coffee with Kuda. Today I am excited to introduce you to a friend of mine called Morton. He is here to represent what we call the SMART table. Over here in Surrey, it's a situational table that discusses and helps individuals that are at risk either of homelessness, addiction, or whatever risk is to the individual. Morton, how are you today?
Good, and thank you so much, Kuda, for having me here today. This is an honor. Really appreciate the opportunity to come to and meet with you for coffee today and talk a little bit more about the Surrey Mobilization and Resiliency Table, which is a situation table. And as you know, these type of situation tables came first to BC, right here in Surrey in 2015, in November. It was the very first table for British Columbia. These tables, they came from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where they were first adopted. And they're a tool in community safety and well-being, and to help bring situations forward in the community where a person is experiencing multiple risk factors that put them at such risk of harm to themselves or other people in the community, maybe their families. And the risk, in order to address them, we have to work together as agencies and different services. Often, you know, some of the feedback and comments that we hear from people is that bureaucracies and government services don't always work together as well as they could to serve people who are really at risk. And often such people aren't able to really articulate themselves what it is that they need. You know, they have a confused mind, or they're not able to really navigate those barriers in the bureaucracy. This situation table model is something really, really positive for Surrey, but it is a tool amongst many different types of services.
If you can tell me what kind of organizations are at the table and who qualifies to be on the table?
So the table is constructed for agencies that have the services that can respond to the different risk factors that a person might present. One of the key reasons why the SMART table or the situation table works is that there's a very solid privacy framework for sharing information appropriately between agencies. Often agencies feel that they can't work with other agencies because they don't have consent from the individual. And the person who's needing that service might not be in a position to actually give consent. So this table gives a very structured way to appropriately, with the appropriate checks and balances in place, to share information, and it's limited information so that different agencies can be involved in an intervention for a person. So there's checks and balances. The agencies that sit at the table, for example, at the SMART table, you have the Ministry of Social Development that provides income assistance. You have Fraser Health that provides mental health and addiction supports. You have various housing support agencies, housing outreach agencies from you know, Newton, from North Surrey, from the Whalley area, from Central Surrey that provide access to housing, rental subsidies for individuals. We have agencies that provide a women's resource center that provides services for somebody who might be fleeing domestic violence or dealing with those services. We have people who deal with youth. We have the school board. We have the RCMP. There are many other agencies that sit at the table, but basically you sit at the table as an agency if you have services that can help people in our community. But the situation table is not a client-facing service. It is a meeting of sorts to bring situations between agencies that are at something called acutely elevated risk. And to meet that threshold of risk, it means that you as an individual are likely to come to imminent harm, or you might harm somebody in the community. There's a public safety, health, and threat to the community, and it's multi-agency in nature. So all of these agencies do need to collaborate. If one agency can reach out to another agency and address this person's risk, then it isn't an appropriate situation to be brought up to the SMART table. And the reason I use situations, Kuda, as you know, is that it's not a case management table. It's a way to prioritize somebody whose situation is that we need an immediate intervention that has to happen within 24 to 48 hours.
Right, and then these organizations, they collaborate to make sure that the person has been addressed in a timely manner.
Exactly. So it's to scramble those resources for a team of individuals to connect with the individual, to offer the services that the SMART team, and I'm going to call it a team because it is a team, and the connections between these human service providers that have been working together is phenomenal to have seen the growth and the relationships built, and the knowledge of each other's services is so key that when somebody is dealing with an individual in this acutely elevated risk situation, one agency is aware of what another agency can bring to bear for that individual. So working together, they're able to navigate themselves, and we talked about how difficult it is sometimes for people even working in the system to be able to access other parts of the system. It brings down those barriers, it brings down silos.
You mentioned Fraser Health is on the table. You also mentioned RCMP being on the table, as well as the school district. We focus a lot on this show about how to destigmatize addiction, right? But then most people in the community, of course, they cry out loud about the RCMP arresting people in addiction or who are using substances. My question to you is, just to help people understand, how does the RCMP help someone who is maybe facing addictions problems?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the reasons that Surrey adopted the situation table model was that they had done a survey in the Whalley, North Surrey area of needs, and over 60% of the RCMP calls for service weren't arrestable offenses, weren't offenses that they could lay any charges on. They were people who were having a social crisis of sorts, and there was a call for help, really. And when the RCMP responded, they realized that they alone couldn't address those needs. So they're often in a supporting role at the situation table, SMART, and their role is certainly not for arresting folks, because the situations that they are involved with are people that need to get connected to services around mental health and addictions.
Man, that's good to hear, because I can only assume a parent who is listening to this conversation and their child is in addiction, their first thought may be, well, if RCMP is involved, then my child goes to jail again and again. But rather, they must have that peace of mind that if the RCMP is involved, it is just to further support the individual to get help for their mental health and addictions.
Very much so, could I? Yeah.
Right. We here work with our youth program. We care a lot about the youth, because the goal is to prevent the youth from going down a wrong path. Right. So with the school district here being involved, what kind of cases may they bring?
Children share everything that's going on in the family with their teachers. And so the school board really, the counselors there, are early detection. If we can get to families that are in crisis, and often it's the mom and dad that are in crisis, and the trauma that they're experiencing impacts the children. So if these families can be brought, and they have been brought to a situation table, and it's beyond the ability of the school district to tackle these challenges for the families. So when they bring a situation forward, and often the children are crying out for help to the school system. And we're able then to help the parents stabilize the parent's situation and bring stability to the child, which then keeps them connected to schools. And they start seeing schools as a place of support. I'm reminded of a situation that we dealt with a family that had lost their housing, and they were living in the bush in our city, camping. basically for the summer with the children. The parents were dealing with some addiction issues. They had no housing, but they really, like any parent, wanted to stay connected to their kids, and they were fearful that maybe the Ministry of Children and Family would take the children away. That situation came to the Smart Table, and we were able to do an intervention, being able to offer them housing, being able to offer them addictions and support. Fraser Health was involved. It was a referral that was brought forward by the school district, and that family was connected with services. And for me personally, I'm most impacted by the situations where we're helping kids or kids are involved. It gives me hope for at least changing the trajectory of some people, that preventing them from ending up in gang life, or preventing them from ending up homeless or severely addicted.
Tell me a little bit more about housing programs at these situation tables, because it is also my understanding sometimes they can help with subsidized housing. Am I correct?
You're correct, and you mentioned a thing earlier too, which is about stigma. And for somebody who's experienced homelessness, or they're dealing with addictions or mental health challenges in their life, being able to present in such a way to be able to secure housing is really, really challenging. And anybody who's living in our city now knows that securing rental housing is a real challenge. So this is where a housing outreach worker and using the housing first approach, where a person, in order to be able to connect with the other services, really needs an address. Otherwise, if you can't find them, how can you do counseling? How can you do treatments and connecting them to medical services and that sort of thing? So the housing out workers, their first step is working with individuals to stabilize them. And often that could mean a stay in a temporary shelter, for men and women, until the person's situation has been stabilized. They've been connected to some addictions treatments or counseling. They can offer, when a person is stabilized, subsidies for market housing. So, with income assistance, the rates have increased, but they only provide so much support. So having that extra subsidy that is providing through BC Housing can give that person an opportunity to secure housing, but also work with the housing outreach worker, who is a little bit like a systems navigator. They're aware of the other services at the situation table. They develop a plan with the person. And often that they do assessments. They do something called a vulnerability assessment tool, a VAT, that can identify what the most suitable housing for them is. And it might be subsidized housing. And subsidized housing, if you don't have the life skills, a lot of people think that anybody could just be taken off the street and put into housing. Well, if you don't really know how to clean a house, or you don't know how to maintain things, or even look after your own personal hygiene, or you're still dealing with hoarding issues, all of those things will become problematic for the landlord, and often we've seen that leads to evictions. So the appropriate type of housing is really, really important. And so you can look at the housing outreach workers as a housing specialist. They also have a lot of contacts in the city. They work closely and build relationship with landlords and build trust, so that if something goes off rails and the landlord needs to call one of the housing outreach workers and saying, I believe so-and-so is maybe off their medications, I'm concerned, there's been some damage, or there's complaints from other tenants, they can come in, they have built the relationship with the individual, they can get them connected to services again.
I'm really glad that you touched on the phrase housing first. I understand, I was talking to an individual who said that this model started from New York or something like that, from New York City. But the idea was to provide housing first to the individual, and then everything else can come. Because like you said, it's almost difficult to get a job if you have no address. There are other two agencies that I was informed by, or you informed me that they were there, but we haven't touched on them yet. The Surrey pre-trial.
Yeah, so corrections sits at the table, and often people who are cycling in and out of the justice system are people who also experience severe drug addiction, mental health issues, or homelessness. And they end up in what's called remand. And there is not necessarily a predictable release date. They may appear before a judge, and at that moment, the time that they've spent in a remand center has been determined to be the sentence. And they're often released very suddenly. So we work closely with the Surrey pretrial in our community, because we want to have a plan for these folks when they are released, so that they don't end up in that cycle again, where their addictions is feeding them into criminality. They haven't addressed any of their challenges that they're dealing with. They're not connected to services. They're released on a Friday night, and by Sunday, sadly, they've come back in the Surrey Pretrial Centre. So our corrections folks work very hard to ensure that these folks are connected to services in the community when they're released, so that they have the best chance of success upon release. Unfortunately, many people who, as you know, Kuda, people who experience addictions, there are many, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think that, for the public that kind of doesn't have much experience with dealing with people in this situation, you really need to think about that, right? Like thinking that this is part of the course for an individual. It might be 6 times in treatment before there is that success. But what does that success mean to our society? It means reconnection with their family, with their children. It means no contact with the justice system. All of these efficiencies. Less draws on social services. So there's a lot at stake for what we do. So the better we get at it, the bigger impact that we can make.
Before we conclude our session, Morten, I need to make sure that I get this correct. Do I, as a community member, refer someone to you, or how do you get to my family member if they are at this acutely elevated risk?
I would say that the situations that come to the SMART table are brought up from the different agencies at the table. And a lot has to do with that. The reason for that is around privacy. So if you are listening to this broadcast today and you have a family member and you're like, you know what, I've tried to navigate the system for my family member. I've really struggled. I don't think all of these different risk factors, because for the situation table, we look at 120 different possible risk factors. It could be mental health, it could be addictions, it could be housing, it could be criminal involvement, it could be criminal victimization. There could be cognitive impairment. So there could be a lot going on for an individual. That could be them involved in a sex trade. That could be involvement in gangs. So all of these risk factors, if you notice that your family member, loved one, isn't getting connected to the services, think about the agencies that are at the situation table. Are they connected to one of those agencies? And have that conversation with them, with that agency. Do you think that my family member, loved one, might be a referral to Surrey's situation table? Because I don't believe that they're getting connected to all of these different services. But no, we don't accept referrals right from the community, because there has to be that threshold of one agency working with another agency first to see if it's appropriate. And it all goes back to that privacy sharing. It's a way to break down the silos, only share information when appropriate. So there's strict requirements in our society about that. However, that also backfires sometimes for individuals, that they don't get connected to the services because one agency alone isn't aware of all the other risks going on for this individual. Having sat there many times, Kuda, I'm amazed when we get to the point that it is appropriate for the name of the individual to be shared. Other agencies have that familiarity with the individual, and they add another risk to it. Another agency knows the person, adds another risk to it. And before we know it, what we thought was already really serious risk is absolutely extreme. And so working together, we have this multiple lens view of what's going on for the individual, which is going to make an intervention better than if you're only trying to treat one issue. The person isn't getting the best services. But the situation table is really a structured meeting. It's not an entity, it doesn't carry a caseload. It's getting systems working together, and it's getting agencies working together.
It's a holistic approach, right?
It's a very holistic approach.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned something about kids in the gangs as well. Some kids are in the gangs and they don't know how to come out. So maybe if the RCMP are saying, well, this is the risk factor, but if a health authority can look at the mental health perspective of the person, if the mental health is taken care of, maybe the person can get reconnected to their family again, and already you have reduced the desire to be part of a gang because now they're part of a family again.
Just you remind me when you mentioned that, Kuda, about this one family referral that we had that involved gangs, where one sibling was involved in gangs, and how it was impacting the younger sibling in that family.
Right.
And, being able to deal with the mental health, this younger sibling and the depression that they were experiencing. I keep thinking about that situation, wondering maybe, the trajectory of that individual was changed because of the services that we were able to. Yeah. And sometimes, we have culturally appropriate services. And that's one of the agencies that we didn't talk about that sits at the table, which is the Fraser Regional Aboriginal Friendship Center. Wow. Many people who do come to the situation table, unfortunately, are from an Indigenous background. Being able to have them as a valuable partner, and they also provide housing and outreach support, is really, really important.
Give me one or two success stories of the Smart Table.
I'll just use the name Barb for one that we had, and Barb was an Indigenous lady who was living on the street. Who was dealing with a severe addiction. There were mental health. Obviously, when you're living on the street, your mental health is going to suffer. Had dealt with some trauma in her life, violence. Had a very difficult upbringing. Had children herself and had lost contact with the children because of the life that she had. The children had been taken into care. And she was a situation that was brought to the Smart Table, and Barb, through an intervention, was able to turn her life around. And one of the agencies really, really connected with her, built that relationship. And I think it's so important for trust to be there between an individual, the agency that serves them, and that trust can really be the basis of opening a lot of other doors. And I'm happy to say that she was connected with housing, she was connected with mental health and addictions treatment. Through time, she was able to turn her life around, become stably housed, and spoke so highly of the situation table and the work that the people do at that table that she wanted her own daughter to be brought to the table, and had also been reconnected to her grandchild through that process, and was caring for her grandchild. So there you go, where you can change your life. You can stop the cycle, and people can benefit from it. Future generations. It doesn't have to go on and on again. So I think about how that grandchild might have, really improved their life quality because of that work that we did for that individual.
It screams hope into individuals out there who don't quite understand the resources out there. It's one thing to destigmatize, but can we still provide the support?
We know there's a lot of work that can be done out there in the community to bring attention to the situation table, what it can do for individuals when the situation is appropriate, of course.
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. You told me, when did you guys start this Smart Table?
We started the Smart Table in November 2015.
November 2015. And SMART stands for?
Surrey Mobilization and Resiliency Table.
So does that mean there's other Smart Tables in other cities?
Yes, there's over 150 tables across Canada and in the United States as well. Ontario actually has quite a few tables, I believe, over 78 tables.
To the best of your knowledge, how many cases have you guys heard so far?
We've had over 462 situations come to the table. And those are situations, but if you actually factor in how many people are involved in each situation, you'd be talking about thousands of people.
Right.
Because, it could be families. So there's a lot of human beings that have been impacted by this. We've done some, Simon Fraser University did an evaluation by doing interviews with the people who had gone through the situation table. In 2018, did interviews with them to get their perspective on the services that were offered to them, as well as looking at the data gathered, de-identified data on the situations that we've been brought to the table. And over half, about 60% or so of the situations, the risk level has been reduced and the individuals have been connected to services. 1/4 of people said no thank you. They were not ready at that time.
Okay.
And that's the thing to remember, is that you can bring the situations back as an agency. They may not be appropriate at that time for the individual. They're maybe not ready. And timing is so important to get a person at the right time when they're ready to engage services.
No, that's actually quite a good point you're making, because someone may be listening and assuming that, there's the fix to the problem. But just because someone is referred doesn't mean they will be accepting of the help.
No.
You will approach, but if they're not ready, they're not ready.
Yeah, and the situation table, it's one tool that we as a society have to deal with these type of issues. So this is for acutely elevated risk situations.
Yeah.
So I think we should focus on prevention a lot more than what we do.
I wanted to ask lastly, who runs this smart table? Is it the City of Surrey, or is it the RCMP, or is it the health authorities?
The City of Surrey is responsible for bringing the group of service providers together.
Right, okay.
They keep the de-identified information on a database, but no names are recorded anywhere. So this is about connecting individuals to the existing system. So there's no long-term tracking involved. But the City of Surrey is responsible for the situation table. But me as an individual, in the work that I do, sitting at that situation table, it's a small part of what I do, but it's probably one of the most meaningful things that I do. It reminds me how working together, being collaborative, and we have a great history here in this Surrey of being collaborative, working together, and we always have to keep that because it helps people. We have to keep the right focus.
I always like to bring this up whenever I talk to people, because where I come from in Africa, right, children are always raised by a village more than a family, right? So that's just the understanding, and whether you like it or not, you don't misbehave just because your parents are not watching. As long as the neighbor is watching, you can't misbehave, right?
Yes.
So that's what being raised by a village is, and at least to us it meant a lot, right? In hindsight, you look back and say, wow, the model does work. In a way, though, I'm just trying to bring this up, like it's similar, right? It's a whole village now coming together. If the health authority could not do it alone, RCMP couldn't do it alone. Now the whole village is coming in together to say, okay, you guys know Johnny. Here's how we know Johnny from our perspective. So now, how can we help this same individual? So that resonates a lot about what we talk about a lot on our show here. Yeah. So thanks a lot for bringing that up.
That's a great analogy, Kuda.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the analogies that I also think about there's appropriate is that, you think of a stream flowing down to the ocean, right? And you go upstream, that's the prevention. And downstream where the river is or the body of water, that's often where do people's journey start, if we work back, and often the trauma that they've experienced in childhood. If it's appropriately dealt with, we can do more work to prevent them from ending up on the streets, severely addicted with mental health challenges going on for them. We can do better.
And we will do better.
Yes.
I think it all starts by taking that first step. So I do want to congratulate you guys on the situation table. It sounds like a lot of work is being done. And congratulations on the number of situations you've come across. I hope everyone sees the work that's being done. It's a lot of work, it sounds like, but very important work. Morten.
Thank you so much, Kuda. I really appreciate that. And I have to say your coffee is excellent.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I do really appreciate it. If you can, please subscribe to our channel for more content. If you can, please join our Patreon team. The link is down below. And also you can join our GoFundMe. The link is also involved below. This will help us to bring awareness of addiction as well as destigmatize this illness. Your support is greatly appreciated and we'll create more content for you. Thank you so much.